Hey everybody, so today I want to do a video on the question, can you be a master through HEMA? So I want you guys to think really critically about what I'm saying. Don't take what I'm saying as truth. There's no real truth for this. Ask questions, figure out how you feel about it, and we should arrive at a diversity of answers because that's fair. People will feel differently about it for good reasons. So kind of where this question came up was sometime in the 90s and 2000s as HEMA was developing. Some people were starting to take on the term masters, and other people took issue with it. Primarily those from like a modern fencing or classical fencing program, because it meant something very specific to them. It meant somebody who graduated from a fencing master's program, and none of the folks in HEMA really had, except for those that specifically did that. And there was also another group of people that came from a HEMA source background, and they also felt that that shouldn't be done because the masters are dead. And so they had rediscovered these sources, were studying with them, but it was a very broken lineage. They didn't know whether or not they were getting it right or what it really looked like. And so the feeling was that it would be improper for somebody to take the term master and use it for a modern day person. There's also some elements that maybe wouldn't apply today, like, oh, we've never fought with a sharp sword, so you can't be a master. Really, we know that's irrelevant because there were a lot of people in period that were masters that never fought to the death or fought with sharp swords, and primarily did it as a safe fencing activity. So it almost became this taboo that people couldn't break. And then there came out of that some self-declared masters, some people that were using the term for specifically like Olympic fencing and such. And there even came about a point where there were some failed masters projects. So what I think is that we have to kind of explore the idea of what is a fencing master. So that means different things to different people. I think when people were imagining it originally, they were kind of thinking of from Asian martial arts or kung fu movies, where somebody who had completely mastered a specific system, right, and had gotten to the very top of it, knew it inside out, knew all the answers, yes and no. And in that sense, they're justified in thinking that a HEMAs can't really do that. But what it really means today is it's somebody who is a professional coach, a professional instructor. And those are two different things. We won't really get into the difference between coaching and teaching or coaching and instructing right now. But it was somebody who had mastered that skill because that is their primary focus, is to teach other people. And you'll see that across fencing is fencing masters are not the best fencers. A lot of the very best fencing masters are mid-level fencers, right? And they end up really loving teaching, and it's something they're very passionate about. And some of them are also very top fencers too. So you kind of get a mix of that. But the primary goal of a fencing master is to teach fencing. So if you can do that, you can become a fencing master. And so you kind of have to look at it from a few different angles here, because becoming a historical fencing master is more complicated. So not only does it involve learning a curriculum, it also involves researching things, building a curriculum, learning how to interpret sources, understanding the fundamentals of fencing, right? Modern fencing, understanding the fundamentals and theory behind historical fencing of specific traditions that you're studying. So it is a little bit more complicated, but it is completely possible. It's completely possible to do that. So the question then becomes why? Why would you want to do that? Well, you want to increase skill. You want to grow the sport. It's a goal that you can obtain. You want to share knowledge with other fencing masters. There's also a level with historical fencing where it's a tradition, right? So we study the sources of masters. And so even more than for sport fencing and for classical fencing, that term is more used, I would say, in day-to-day speech. So for example, when I train with a fencing master of Olympic fencing, we don't call him maestro. We just call him coach, or their first name is very informal. It's the same with myself. Even though I passed a master at arms exam, nobody calls me that, and I don't really want them to. Sometimes they'll call me coach, and that's it, right? So it's not really about that. But then there's another layer of it where it's a dignity of our own sport. So what we're saying is, I'm not better than anybody else. I'm not saying I'm better than an instructor. But what I'm also saying is that other sports that use that term, you're not better than me, right? So there's kind of an equality there. And especially as we move forward and maybe are negotiating with provinces, negotiating with countries, on sporting bodies and things like that, that kind of thing will become important for us to distinguish ourselves. So the main thing is that you can become a master of coaching. You can learn how to coach people, and you learn that through fundamentals, getting them to have a good grip on the sword, getting them to go into a good stance. And you can teach a diversity of that in a different way. So originally, I think people think of these programs very much in terms of classical programs or traditional martial arts, where you have a set curriculum that you teach, and you have to teach it exactly as it is and not really vary from it. Modern sport fencing does this very differently. So because you have a multiplicity of styles, you have all sorts of different styles from different parts of the world, say entering the USFCA program, you could enter it as a classical French fencer or a German épéiste or a modern Italian fencer, and you can show an attack in a bunch of different ways that are actually the opposite of each other. In the modern Italian one, you might not extend the arm much before you launch an attack, and you do it at a close range. Whereas in the classical French, you would get the arm out right away, right? And they're almost opposite ways of doing things, but they both work. And the important thing is to understand why and when to do it, and to be able to coach that to a high level. So you could teach the opposite things to people. And that is a great model for HEMA, because we will teach things in different ways. You'll have different curriculums. The key is working on those universals of distance, timing, tactical decision making, all of those things that can really make anything work if they're used for it. So our knowledge will change as we learn more about history, as we uncover more texts, as we get a deeper dive into language and find supporting sources, right, that are going on. And so if you do all of those things, the historical knowledge will increase, and maybe one day your interpretation will change. That's fine, because you can make all of these fundamentals work on their own. So the thing that I want to say is you do not want to follow what other people say dogmatically. Like, there's a lot of authority that happens when we form this like script in our heads of you cannot become a master. That was due to, some of the people, especially from the camp of like HEMA source purists, they dominated the narrative. People like John Clemens, people like, I don't really want to name anybody, but what that ends up doing is it takes away your agency as an individual to decide for yourself. Those narratives are very powerful, just like religion is powerful in people's minds. And you end up reenacting the script that other people wrote for you. So the key is we have to take back our agency. And so the question would be like, how would you do that? How would you build a master's program? So the example that I used, and it's happened for, I can think of 3 generations of people that it's happened to in my own lineage, right? So when the British wanted to build a program, they brought in Roger Crosnier from France, and he was the Olympic professor or the Olympic teacher for the French team. And they brought him in, and he helped form a program for all 3 weapons and a coaching program and a fencing master's program. If you got all 3, you were called a professor of fencing, but they would use a master for somebody who got 1 or 2. And so he brought that over from France and brought his expertise, and that's happened multiple times throughout British history. So another example was one of his students was the famous Bob Anderson. And Bob Anderson was an Olympian, a fencing master, and he also was the guy who choreographed Lord of the Rings, Princess Bride, The Empire Strikes Back, all these great movies that probably made you, definitely made me get into swordsmanship. So he was actually brought over to Canada. He was a fencing master from Britain. He was brought over to Canada to serve as the technical director, and he helped develop the programs. I actually have some of his booklets from my fencing coach, who learned from him as a kid in the UK. They both ended up coming to Canada, and my coach taught me. So it was a direct lineage, right? And so this is another example of that. So we wanted to make a fencing master's program, and one of the advisors on the program was Francesco Loda, who's in the video here. And we ended up bringing him to Canadian Nationals, and I was asked to test. So I didn't plan on testing for fencing master's rank, but I was asked to. And so it was a week of training that we did together. You saw my complete curriculum. I had written a thesis, that was some 200 pages. Ended up doing a long test with him as well. And that's how you do it, is you bring in other people. So Loda is a fencing master in Olympic fencing, and also is the head rapier coach for the whole country of Italy. So we brought him in, and he's sharing his expertise with us and guiding us through the process. But that's how it's done, is you bring in other people that are competent. So this is doable. Do not let other people take away your agency from you. Your answer should look different from mine. Don't let that scare you. It shouldn't scare any one of us. We can all participate in this together. But all of these things are possible. It's important for you to form your own ideas rather than following a script that somebody else wrote that was probably less competent than you are today.